Hello, everybody. It is June 13th, 2023, and this is the OLM working group and issue triage meeting. So we have a very full list of topics to talk about today in our agenda. So we're going to discuss whether or not we should validate OLM on different Kubernetes distributions. Ankita is going to showcase a demo. We got another demo of off cluster resolution CLI, and I'm not sure what this one is. Migration from query to JSON interface for programmatic access to gRPC APIs without gRPC calls. And looks like this one was moved to. Feels like there was conflict, so this last item we probably won't get to unless the submitter is here. Okay, cool. So we'll kick off like we usually do by looking at our current board. So we pull that up. We've got some movement on the Kellogg D side of things that we look like, an operator D. Oh, sorry, operator controller. So a flake was fixed and the different bundle format support was completed. And then we have a number of items in progress, such as reconciling operators on any catalog source change. This is 205 and will be showcased today in the working group meeting and then move to done. We have the DEPI library in CLI. We have a tracker for DEPI 96. And we have an ongoing issue where we're honoring upgrade edges defined in the catalog. There is one other thing that the operator controller team added to this milestone. We wanted to introduce feature gates. We split it out into its own issue from operator controller 231. So the goal is that we can tech preview honoring upgrade edges using this feature gate work. So technically 255 has to be done before 231. We don't want to merge 231 without first merging 255. And no one that's assigned to 255 yet. So if somebody's interested in introducing a feature gate to the operator controller for new features, that'd be great. It would be using feature flags, which is a package that's used heavily in Kubernetes. So if you're interested, please just reach out and let me know. And we can assign work to you and give you any information you need.
Hey, Alex, you can assign that to me, Bryce. I did this for Catalog D last week, so should be relatively straightforward.
Perfect. Thank you, Bryce. All right, well, there we go. Cool. So that covers our milestone review. Does anyone have any questions and or concerns? I definitely think that the number of things we have in progress, this isn't going to land in by all of this is going to land by the end of the week. So we may have to have a discussion. We can do so offline, whether or not we pull some of these things out and put them into a follow-up sprint, namely 255 and 231. Or if we want to just keep this milestone going. Okay. So first question, Frederick, would you like to introduce this topic?
Yeah, sure. So it's really an open question to understand whether there is interest for validating OLM on something else and kind of mini cube, and what would be the reason for that. So obviously I have my opinion on that, but I would be interested in getting the opinion from the community and other people. So that's Piotr has shared something on the agenda, but unfortunately it's not attending the call. So I would be interested in getting other view from other people on that.
What would be the purpose of doing it?
Yeah, so that's one of the point I mentioned. So I would be interested in seeing and hearing why people would want that, if there are things that they think are valuable for them. So obviously I have my opinion on this one, but I would be interested in getting other people's opinion first before I share mine, in order to pollute the discussion.
My perspective is that we should validate it against Kubernetes APIs as defined, and running it on kind or Minikube is perfectly good enough for that, and expect it to work on public distros. I suppose the other question here is, would we close issues because they're not running on a distribution we'd tested on? No, I don't think we would. So I think it's I don't think we should, myself.
Any other people want to share their views on that?
Hey, so I'll just chime in. So I tend to agree. I believe that was James talking, so I tend to agree with James on this one. I think the one thing that could be nice, is this whole, like, how do we make it so OLM is more consumable to users in an upstream world, right? Get greater adoption there. And I think specifically calling out, like, hey, we work on all these other we work on all these major distributions of Kubernetes, and you have some soft guarantee because we could do something as simple as, like, round robin selecting a distro of Kubernetes to run it on if it was paid for. And I think like just making people aware that we, like, invest in making sure we run on everything might lead to a stronger community or stronger use upstream. But I don't know that this is something that I would, like, prioritize over just making sure that the new OLM is easily installable and upgradable. So all of this conversation I just shared is really based on the idea of, like, OLM v1 adoption. I'm hesitant to really invest in OLM v0 for a couple of reasons. One, we've pushed all our engineering effort really to OLM v1. I want to continue to see that project take off and see less feature development in OLM v0. And I feel like if we're pushing more to appear that OLM v0 can run on a bunch of stuff, I'm concerned that it wouldn't push people towards OLM v1. It would create an aura where people are like, oh, OLM v0 is also fine to use too, instead of saying, okay, we should all really move to OLM v1. So those are my thoughts.
Okay.
I see.
Any other people want to share their views?
I think I agree with you, Alex, that it's like, in my opinion, having pipelines confirming that we work on distro XYZ is great for adoption. Like, I would definitely be more confident using something which has CI for this. But as Joe raised, yes, there will be costs. Someone will have to pay for this. This is more, advertisement side of things. But from the technical perspective, I think we probably don't have to worry about running on different distros, because, like, Kubernetes itself, they have E2E tests on different cloud providers upstream. I believe we don't need that because we do not use anything cloud specific underneath. We use the Kubernetes APIs. And those APIs, we assume they are tested upstream of Kubernetes. And I think that should be fine, unless there is something I'm missing. Like, what would be technical reason for doing this?
Okay, I can mention one thing, or considering the new Kubernetes security standard or the different ways Kubernetes distribution are configured per default in terms of security. So for instance, in OpenShift, you're not allowed to run as root your pod. Do you think that's something we will need to take in consideration, or do you think it's not relevant?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. But I'm wondering whether we can get reliable tests for things like that with without having to run, OpenShift itself. Like, can we configure a security policy in kind to have to test the same situation? This way, we would be able to say, okay, we can run as root and we can run as without root, and that should be sufficient probably to say that, okay, we support those two scenarios without necessarily saying that we support specific distros.
Okay, so I think that's a good idea to do that, but it does not take in consideration that this configuration may change from one release to the other from the cloud providers, and we will need to adapt and be aware of this change in first place. So the pod security standard was one example, but maybe others are coming. Okay. Right. Maybe I can share my view on that. I think we could mitigate this thing because it's a way OLM gets deployed. So I agree with this, what you have said in terms of we are talking about certified Kubernetes distribution. So that means that the API should behave the same, independent of whether that's JKE, AKS, or EKS. And for the other aspects, like pod security standard and the way OLM gets deployed, we should make it configurable. So in the sense that if it's not working with the default, there should be an easy way for user to amend the deployment so that it does work with stricter requirements. Well, what are your views on that?
So Frederick, I think what I'm hearing so far is all the technical discussions, or all the discussions are geared towards the technical challenges or the problems. What I'm not hearing so far is the business justification for taking on an effort like this. I think when you hear the word, this is going to incur cost, I think what the team is looking for is probably a more better clarity on what the business justification for this is. The reason that I say this is I've heard within Red Hat, I've heard some conversation about getting OLM to star case effort and stuff like that. However, from where I am sitting, I'm not exactly too clear on everything that's going on there. So I think if there is a real business justification, if you can probably see a write-up, hear someone talk about it.
Okay, so I have to clarify things here. So it's a community call. So we are talking about a community project and what it means in terms of community. So the question is really about the community project. And at the end of the day, what we want in this project is something that is useful to a large audience and and gets adoption and contribution. So that's the different player and companies using this project can build a business on it, but the project itself is a community, so it's not a business.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. So I think with
So-
that,
Yeah, so why I raise this question is whether we can bring values to the community, so something that is valuable enough so that we put effort and possibly money in it, or and at the end of the day, the reason should be probably two types of reasons, and we have mentioned both of them here. So one is technical, if it helps identifying issues, and second aspect is what Alex mentioned on the marketing side. So making our community larger by bringing confidence to people and potential users that we can have our project running on many, if not all, Kubernetes certified distributions.
okay, so
So,
go for it, Alex.
oh, you can go on. I'll follow up after.
I was just gonna repeat what you just said. Like, it sounds like the answer to all of your questions, Frederick, is yes. However, if you go back to what Alex said in the beginning, which is whatever cycles we have, it's being invested in OLM v1. So I think we are talking about whether we have the cycles to invest in this effort. And it sounds like in the moment we don't, or at least it's going to be hard to find the cycles to do that.
Yeah, but you know, this is an open question, and really the question was, is there value in doing that? I'm not asking you to do something. I'm just asking to the community whether there is value. I'm not asking you to invest time, to invest money in this thing. I'm just asking whether there is value in it. And my question didn't specify whether it's for OLM v0 or OLM v1, and I understand, and I find it reasonable to say that we want to increase our community rather on OLM v1 more than v0, because we want people to move to what we are working on. But yeah, first we need to make that usable. Which is not we are not really there yet. Yeah. So Joe, Alex.
I'm not sure who's first. I just put mine up like a few seconds ago.
If you have something to say here, you can do it. I was going to ask basically for a GitHub discussion for this topic, and then move on because we are almost halfway through the meeting and we have like 5 other agenda items.
Okay.
Yeah, my last point was just going to be that I think what we did with SDK made a lot of sense, where we had tons of users that would use Operator SDK against EKS, AKS, etc. We never actually tested SDK outputs on those clouds, but when issues came in and someone said, hey, the thing that SDK generates doesn't work on AKS, we'd say, okay, well, can you give us some logs? Can you tell us what was going on? Can you help us try to figure out how we can fix this? We don't necessarily have access to our own AKS account, but if you can show us everything, all the details, then we'll make an effort to resolve your problem, and then maybe introduce a regression test so that we don't break it again. So in my opinion, like, that's probably the happy middle ground here. But yeah, I think what Alex said is probably a good idea if we want to keep talking about it. Let's just keep putting it in discussion.
Yeah, and just to Frederick, I actually think this is like, I really like that you're coming to the community asking how we can make the project more consumable for different types of users, and I think that's very valuable. And I think there's going to be a larger discussion on that thread about like, what is the way that we make OLM more consumable, and what are like the milestones just in that aspect. And I think, like, just making it so that we deliver some value
and then making it so that we have a release people want, and then making it so that we can upgrade from that release to new versions seamlessly. And having all that done on vanilla case makes sense, at least from my opinion. And then if we say the next thing we need to do is really start building support for running on different ecosystem or different cluster flavors and like really selling it, like that's a discussion we can have if we think that's going to drive more people to adopt us. But I think it's, you know, part of a larger strategy where the crux of the issue is how do we get people to really trust using this thing on all district, like no matter what cluster they're using. And that's the question I really want to see answered, if that you know, just acts as a closing point. So can we create a to-do item to create a discussion for this topic? Do you mind if I assign that to you, Frederick?
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Great. Craigslist. Okay, next I'm going to hand it over to Ankita to demo her work on issue 205. Ankita, are you available? Okay, Mikola?
All right. Yeah, one sec. Can I share the screen, please? Sure. Thanks. Okay. So you see my screen now. How do I? Okay. So last week I demoed the first iteration of tool of cluster resolution. Just to recap, so last week I had like really skeleton, which was able to do the resolution of cluster. However, it was relying on catalog D to run on the cluster, and it was fetching resources from the cluster. So like it was listing all the operator objects from the cluster. So I made some progress since then, and now this pull request, which I'm sharing now, includes it's still very. I think it will change a lot. I will come back to that a bit later, but now it supports resolution without a cluster at all. So you don't need a cluster. You can provide the tool with file-based catalog in form of image or in form of directory on your machine, and give it a package name, package version, and channel, same stuff as last week, what I showed last week, and it will do the resolution. There is also an option to provide it with the directory which contains manifests. At the moment, we read the, here's the, I'll show you one of these examples. So here's an example where I create a operator object like this, put it into the directory, and give it directory to the resolution tool. So what happens in this example is that if we pull the image with the catalog and we read the directory, we load all of the operator objects into the fake client inside of the tool, and we build. We say that Argo CD operator is a required package, so it must be present in the solution, and we want to install Prometheus package. So it does resolve the Prometheus this way. So this last example is basically current state of what we have in operator controller. At the moment, like the tool caught up with all the functionality we have in the operator controller, but can do it offline. So what's next for this is that what I need to think about how to expand the inputs. So for example, if we want to say this operator should only be installed on Kubernetes version 1.19 and above, right? So we need somehow a way to provide this the input into the tool about the cluster and like runtime basically, but without having to run it inside of the cluster. But this I think will depend a lot on different piece of work which Per is looking into. So Per is looking into how we can build problems for our DEP solver at the moment, and there is an RFC which he presented last week, so it might be a good idea to catch up on the recording from the last week if someone missed it. So this bit will depend on this a lot. Another bit is that there is currently a lot of duplication between the resolution CLI and the operator controller itself, which is like an in-cluster thingy. A main source of duplication is how we convert bundle metadata into inputs into the DEPI solver. And this will require some changes on the potentially on catalog D. So we can, I know that Bryce is looking into making catalog D more of a library. So this will help to reduce this duplication as well. So I feel at this point that this is as far as it makes sense to go with this proof of concept. I will probably leave it there for a while. And Alex created a discussion on GitHub where we request everyone to share use cases. So please do take a look at this discussion and take a moment to share how you think you can use it, whether it's useful at all or not, etc. So just provide feedback as much as possible in here, so we can have it in one place. And I think once we have once we progress towards other topics like declarative problem building for solver, etc., and catalog D as a library, I think it will be and gather this feedback. We will just come back to the resolution CLI and make adjustments based on feedback and refactor the code. So that's basically it. That's what I wanted to share at this point. I see, Alex, I think it's you, right? Hand raised.
From the last discussion, you're good to go.
Sorry, say again?
Sorry, I was I left it up from the previous discussion, so
okay.
no comment.
Okay, got it. So anyone has any questions, comments? Okay, if not, then just please take a look at the GitHub discussion. I linked it in the agenda, so it's very easy to find it. And thanks for listening to me. That's it.
Perfect. Thank you, Mikolai. So, Ankita, are you back yet?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's great. In that case, I can share my demo. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, then hi everyone. I wanted to show a quick demo of the operator controller SWATs on catalogs. This should help us trigger resolution whenever a catalog event occurs. So right now I already have a kind cluster with operator controller already installed. You can see that the operator controller deployment is already running. And yeah, pardon me. I think I have a slight issue with responsiveness, I think. Well, anyway, let's move on to I think my laptop has frozen. Can I try this one more time?
Yes. Quick 1 second. So the next item on the agenda is migration from Query to JSON interface for programmatic access to gRPC APIs without gRPC calls. So I'm going to, James, would you like to lead this discussion?
So this is John Huckins. I'm the one who actually put that onto the agenda.
Oh, sorry.
So I've been talking a little bit with Joe. Let me just bring up what I have. Let me share my screen, and then I think I think that'll help drive some of the discussion. So we have some code in the existing code where we leverage so we've got a declarative config that's already basically loaded into memory. And we've been using the convert to model and then converting to the querier interface, and then using that querier in a bunch of different scenarios where we actually, like we're wrapping a bunch of the calls that are actually exposed by the gRPC endpoint, so that we can actually call them programmatically without having to spin up the whole, container and try to get the information that way. So we've got, like for example, get channel head, and so we've got a function that then just calls into the querier to get that information and returns it. We've got a bunch of different instances of that throughout our project. So in the recent refactoring, that functionality moved into the cache. So there's now the way that seems to be initialized is that you've got this package index, which is private, but that's initialized through the process of actually getting the when you do the load to actually load up the stuff that actually is inside the package as JSON, and then getting that that populated, so that way that can be you've got functions in the querier or in the cache that it now allows you to be able to do the same kinds of calls. They're just in a different location, but the problem that we have is that we've already got this declarative config already loaded, and so there isn't really a good way, or a way that doesn't involve extra computation that we don't necessarily need. For example, like in the build scenario, where you've loaded up the declarative config and then you're converting it to the model, and then you're loading up the packages for that model, but then you're actually doing other work to actually marshal that out and doing other things in here that we probably don't need, at least from the perspective of how I want to be able to consume this. And so it seems like the piece that's disconnected here is what we need is a way to be able to do effectively the code that deals with the generating the packages for the model. So that way we could then, You know, because we've already done the work of actually loading the model and then converting the model. We just need this piece that actually generates the packages, so that way we actually can use that to query against and call the right APIs as needed. And so that's the piece that seems to be missing. This is all private. I can't do anything with this. And so Joe pointed out some potential ideas in where you can do load and rebuild and doing other things, but all of this actually involves extra work that we don't probably need to incur because we've already done the part of actually loading the declarative config and we have the model. So it just seems like there's a piece that's just missing here that we need to potentially expose through in the cache to be able to say, here's your model, just go build that for me. You know, give me back an instance that actually is populated properly. I don't know. First of all, I'm going to stop there. And I don't know, Joe, if you have any comments or thoughts on what I've said.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is, are you using the loaded FBC anywhere else for other reasons, or is it always sort of into the model and into the query?
Yeah, so like from our perspective, what we're doing is, you know, we've got a whole abstraction that sits around the catalog. So, you know, whether we've already done the work of being able to actually load the declarative config from whatever source that happens to be, and we're leveraging, you know, operator registry code to actually do all of that. So in the case for the cache, we don't really ever really interact with the cache. We don't, you know, because the cache is actually something that has actually been, is my understanding of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the cache is actually built as part of the Docker image, you know, so when, you know, you take the declarative config, you've converted it, and then you've got the cache that's sitting inside the Docker container instance, and that's effectively private. If, you know, I don't think we have a way to be able to really reliably determine where did that cache get stored, you know, so I'm not sure we can actually say, okay, go load the cache, because I don't think we actually have the information that you would need to know where to go load that cache from.
Yeah, that's a good question, I guess. The way that the Docker file gets generated, it always goes into /temp/cache. So, I guess if you knew what the Docker file was, you could do that. But even beyond that, it sounds like you're not using the cache anyway from these things. So you're in what's happening now is you're incurring the cost of rebuilding that cache when you build the query or the old way, right? Like I pointed out that code that under the hood, it just says like, oh, okay, well, I'll just give you a temp directory and build the cache there and then hand you the query. And then now all of your queries are super fast because we've given you a cache that knows how to answer those queries really well. One more question. Is the original source of this always like a file, an fs.fs or a file system or something, or are you like somehow
effectively under the hood? I mean, because what we're doing is we're basically saying, give me the, you know, we're using the loading mechanisms that are provided by operator, you know, by the registry project to be able to load up that stuff. So we're actually using you know, let's say, for example, like when we create the actual the instance, we're just using the mechanisms for you know, we're calling into, how do I want to say this? We're calling into the operator registry code to say, go load this stuff for me and get me back at the declarative config. And we're using all of, like, say, for example, we're using action render to go say, go run this and then give me back the actual declarative config.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a super great answer. The whole point of the cache was we were noticing that on startup, these containers were taking like a super long time, and they would also require lots of memory because every single time we were essentially building that cache every single start of a container. And so the idea behind the cache was if we build a cache and then take a digest of the original FBC that was used to build the cache plus the cache itself, then it becomes a lot faster to just like zip through all of the actual file system data, recompute the digest and be like, oh yeah, it all still matches. I don't have to redo anything. Startup time is much improved. There's very little memory usage. And then we just go directly to that cache that's already there. So that's the history of it. Unfortunately, like building that cache requires a file system because we're doing a, we're basically tarring the file system in a writer and then computing the digest of the tarred writer essentially. So without that file system, we can't compute a digest correctly. Maybe there's a way we could just say like, okay, well, the digest is going to just be empty when you come from that direction, and then it's always going to be invalid, in which case we always reload it. So I think there's potentially some avenues here. But I was literally just playing with trying to code it, and it's not like super obvious either. So I think it might take some time to figure out what the best thing is. But I wonder if you could pass around, like anywhere that you've got your loaded FBC declconfig.declconfig, like the one obvious workaround right now is, could you put that in a struct that also just contains the original FS that was associated with it? And then when you get to the point that you need to do the gRPC query or talk to that struct, but instead of pulling out the FBC declconfig.declconfig, do the load thing. And yes, like that does incur the extra cost of reloading if you don't already have a cache. So it's not ideal, but it seems like your current process is also not ideal because you're still building that cache every single time. So
Yeah, I mean, because from our perspective, from the ways that in which we're using it, we're trying to load up the catalog so that we can actually do processing on it, so we can actually do validations and other kinds of things, and a whole host of, there's a lot of different ways in which we're trying to use the declarative config as the backbone for all of the things we want to do for like catalog merging and lots of different activities that are centered around a catalog. So ultimately it comes down to, we're trying to load a catalog and then manipulate a catalog and then write a catalog back out so that we can do the things that we need to do on our end.
Yeah. And one more fundamental existential question is like in OLMV1, there is no SQLite stuff or gRPC stuff. Like we're just gonna ship the FBC directly to the cluster. And like if you look at the OLM controller, it should, well, right now it's not quite doing this, but eventually, somewhat soon, it'll be just looking at the FBC and making decisions on it directly. So it might also be worthwhile at this point to step back and think about whether it makes sense to continue relying on that gRPC query interface, because that is going to go away with OLMV1. So I don't, that's a while from now, but everything with FBC is moving in the direction of just consume the FBC directly. So if there's a way to sort of re-implement those queries and manipulations directly against the FBC, that's probably something you guys should look into.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we have is, I think the like getting channel heads as an example. That's probably the primary use case that I can think of. And I think that we've got other people on the call here who may have other ideas or other thoughts, but the getting channel heads is probably the biggest concern, and doing that in a way that that mirrors what OLM is actually trying to do. So if there's a function for that, that's probably, there's also things where we also do for like getting channel dependencies and other things like that too. And so we're kind of leveraging known functions to be able to handle that. And if there's a migration path into the new stuff, then certainly I can see how we could maybe move towards that.
So there is in the model.channel, there's a function that returns the channel head. So that would hopefully solve that problem. And
I'm sorry, in which piece? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. In which piece?
The model.channel struct.
Oh, okay.
You iterate the packages in the model, and then you iterate the channels within each package. You can call channel.head, and it'll return the head or an error if it can't figure that out. As far as the dependency stuff, the logic is you can go look at the code for the gRPC server that translates the model to the gRPC call. It's not all that complicated, but it would be like a little bit of extra code I think you'd have to write. I think it's all doable with the model though. So it might be worth looking into that to see how far that gets you, and then in which case you don't even have to use the gRPC interfaces.
Okay, yeah, and so the model is effectively, even in the new variation, that model is still valid in the OLM v1 scenarios.
I'm not going to say it's the whole purpose of the model was for us to be able to, it was like an intermediate representation to get back and forth between SQLite and the gRPC API and FBC. So it's sort of this nice thing that made it easy to translate sort of between all three. Once SQLite goes away and gRPC API goes away, I can't imagine the model sticking around either because it's somewhat vestigial at that point. But I could imagine new functionality that gets added that helps with answering some of those sorts of questions. But it's hard to predict. A lot of this stuff, I think we're thinking of just moving to like on cluster or into the resolver CLI or wherever the actual like client of FBC is. And maybe those are the libraries that, you know, a year or two from now are the ones that you guys would also care about.
Okay, yeah, so because ideally, I mean, if the FBC is a thing that is still going to be present, even in OLM v1, and I assume that that's true, functions and features that are attached to that interface or that function, however you want to say it, that struct, being able to operate on it, you know, to do like things like look up channel heads, look up dependencies, do all the things that the gRPC API maybe allows you to do. If there's functionality that is associated with the FBC, or at least an API that takes as an input is the FBC, would be, you know, maybe that's the way forward. I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out where we want to focus our attention, how, I mean, we've got the short-term problem, but we've got an API that's built around the querier and, you know, trying to figure out how to move forward from that. But then there's a longer term discussion about, like you say, you know, how do you get to OLM v1 and maintain all of that.
I think short term, we can try to figure something out one way or another. Either you use the model or we figure out a way to build a cache without having an underlying file system or, you know, something like that. I think like with OLM v1, there's still a lot of exploration to do. Like we might not even have a concept of channel heads in OLM v1, you know, like it's that wide open. So I don't know, you know, we'll be talking about that sort of stuff for the next long while, I think. The other thing with FBC is it's intentionally extensible, a lot more so than the SQLite stuff was. So it wouldn't surprise me if we said, oh, well, now there's going to be an olm.channel.v2 schema, and it gets rid of skips, replaces, and skip range and puts in something else, right? So there's a lot of this sort of depends on clients having more of an understanding of what's in that FBC, I think is my point.
Okay. All right, well, cool. I mean, I guess we also take this off, you know, if we've got other questions or things that we can always talk about this in Slack too, so.
Yeah, I would suggest as an action item, let's open an issue in the operator registry and kind of describe the problem there, and then we can figure out nuts and bolts of what we're going to do to fix it.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks.
All right, we have 4 minutes. Ankita, how much time do you need for your demo?
That should pretty much be enough, I think. I'll make it quick.
Let's do it.
Okay, so Hi everyone. I'm going to do a really quick demo on the operator controllers watch on catalogs. As of now, I have an operator controller instance already running on kind cluster. Currently, we have no catalogs on cluster, so any operators installed should fail to resolve. As you can see. Now if I go ahead and create a catalog on cluster, this should re-trigger resolution in a few moments. It takes a short while for the catalog to unpack, but once that's done, you can see that the resolution triggers again, and we have successfully installed operator. Yeah. And you can see that the CRDs from the Argo CD operator have been installed successfully. That's all I had to share for my demo.
Fantastic.
If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, I don't think I have any specific questions. I think that was a great demo and it really captures the use case. So well done. One thing we might want to follow up on is like making sure we define what it means if an operator reports that it's failed. Like is failed an unrecoverable state or recoverable state. I think we want it to be recoverable, but just making sure that we have that well defined would be very useful. That's the only thing I kind of noticed in the demo, and I don't think you know, like your demo was supposed to solve that. It was really well done. So great job, Ankita.
Thanks.
Fantastic. So with that, I'm comfortable moving issue 205 to the completed category. As a reminder, 205 focused on reconciling operators when catalog source updates occurred. So are there any objections to moving that to done now that this code is merged and been demoed? Okay, on that note, I will move it over. And I think that brings us to the top of the hour. So I'm going to let everybody go. Are there any last minute comments anyone wants to make before we break? Perfect. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for participating in today's community meeting, and I will see you all next week.